Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn about everything to do with conflict, be it the what, the how, when, why, who. We also present different frameworks of how to resolve conflict, and also different mnemonics, including my original mnemonics of conflict resolution. I also present stories when pertinent to illustrate points that are of relevance to the topic at hand. And I have a surprise for you. In the new year, my plan is that the very last Friday of each month, I would like to invite a guest that is an expert in conflict resolution to join us. I think you would enjoy the panel that I have lined up for us moving forward. So, with not much ado, today's episode is titled, What Do You See? A is for analyze. So I'd mentioned that in episodes of this show, I will be talking about the what, the who's, and whys of conflict resolution and introducing original mnemonics. So in previous episodes, if you've not watched them, I highly recommend that you go watch them. Why? Because I started by building the foundation of what conflict is. And then I began by illustrating the 5 A's of my original mnemonic of conflict resolution. One episode addressed the first A, which is assess, the second, approach. And today we'll be talking about A, which is for analyze, hence the title of this episode. So, some of you might be asking why the title, The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. Excellent question. 2 reasons. First, I love to dance. And some of you can agree that conflict resolution and negotiation is like a dance. Hence the title, The Dancing Negotiator. You might be wondering, what does a DHA mean? What kind of doctor am I? I'd like to start by saying I am not a medical doctor. DHA stands for Doctor of Health Administration. So think of it as the business of healthcare. Later on in the episode, I'll give you a little bit more detail about who I am and how you can access my services. But for this show, let us delve right into A is for analyze and what do you see? And that means, what do you see when you see a conflict situation? So I mentioned that conflict resolution is like negotiation, is like a dance. It is important to remember that negotiation involves people. That is, the negotiation process involves people, and negotiators deal with people. My mission is to empower everyone to deal effectively and efficiently with conflict on a timely basis, okay? I have an author, a book of his, which I really appreciate and I think you will enjoy. It's called Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In, and it's by Fisher, Urey, and edited by Patton. This was actually the one of the international bestsellers of the Harvard Negotiation Project. So what I'd stated earlier about remembering that negotiation deals with people and negotiators are people was something I glimpsed from this book, but I didn't have to glimpse that from this book to share that with you, but I'm just giving credit where it's due. Now, I like to use stories and scenarios to illustrate points. So for today, I'm gonna share a story and I wanna paint an image for you. In the meantime, before I show this picture, I want you to think about an orange. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna share my screen here. So think of an orange and what comes to mind. For some people, as they're thinking of an orange, they might actually think of the fruit, the orange. For some people, it might be the color orange. But I want you to envision the fruit orange. And with that, I would like you to envision the different layers of an orange. So for example, when you have an orange, you have the rind, right? And by that, I mean the peels of an orange, the outer peelings of an orange. And then you also have the inside part of the orange, which is the edible part of the orange. Okay. Sorry there. It looked like my screen paused for a minute there, and I do hope you could hear me. But just in case you didn't hear me, what I was saying is I would like you to envision an orange. And when you think of an orange, what comes to mind? For some people, they think of the fruit. For some people, they think of the color. But I would like to guide you to think of the fruit, the orange. Think of the rind, which is the outermost part, the peel part, and then the internal part, which is the edible part. The story is told of a young, well, let's just say 2 individuals who wanted an orange. There was only one orange to share, and they wanted that orange. The other one, each of them wouldn't give up the fact that they wanted the orange. So a mediator had to step in and start asking the questions. Why exactly do you want the orange? And then the mediator found out that the reasons why they wanted the orange was for different reasons. One wanted the peel, maybe to make a type of cake, and the other wanted the inside part of it to make juice. I might have, added a little bit of spice to this story, but it's the moral that I want us to get to, okay? So 1 orange, 2 individuals want this orange. They do not budge on their position of wanting the orange. Without the mediator would not have understood, and each of them would have understood what the different positions were, why they wanted it. And it had to take the mediator to ask the question why, which shows that sometimes in conflict and negotiation, sometimes we're so intent on our positions that we even forget to ask the other party, why do you want the issue? Or whatever it might be. Why do you have that position? So that's called position statements. And also position bargaining is basically bargaining, negotiating about the conflict at hand, okay? Now, on the right-hand side, we have something, a picture. And what comes to mind when you see that picture? For some of you, it might be like, I see seeds. If you said seeds, you're correct. To be specific, those are actually orange seeds. But I would like you to think of 1 seed. And when I say 1 seed, I also like you to think about, perhaps if you've watched the movie Big. If you've not, please go watch that movie. I highly recommend it. It's very, very, very old, but the movie Big is very pertinent to what we're talking about in terms of the seed. There was a scene in the movie where I remember, I believe it was in a class, don't quote me on this, but a teacher held up a seed and asked the class, what do you see? I remember a student, I believe, was a little bit cheeky and sarcastic and said, I see a seed. And the teacher was like, I see possibilities. So in the same token, when there's a complex situation, see possibilities of how it can be resolved or what the issue at hand might be, okay? So it's always about the possibilities, okay? So having said that, even though I have a healthcare background, I tend to use scenarios from other work environments. So this show and episodes tend to discuss conflict resolution and the issue of conflict in the workplace setting. I have a healthcare background, like I said, but I do realize that not all viewers have a healthcare background. Hence, I like to use different scenarios from different workplaces to illustrate points that I would like to make. So in that token, for today's episode of A is for Analyze, what do you see? I would like to invite you to go to the workplace of mortgages. It might be like mortgages. Yeah. If you're a house owner, most of us have mortgages. Some people are blessed not to have a mortgage, but most people have mortgages. So think of a workplace setting that involves mortgages. And to give you a little bit of a visual here, I would like you to specifically look at mortgages, okay? So when I say look at mortgages, I want to paint a little bit of an image for you. So let's get to the right screen of mortgages. So basically, as I'm pulling this up, I want you to think about a few things here. Here we go. So I want you to think about when you have a mortgage, there are usually three parties in play. Now, depending on where you're watching from and which country you belong to, it might be a little bit different. But for the process of this episode, again, the workplace is the mortgage lenders, mortgage providers, if you will, okay? So this first picture on top here, think of it as a mortgage provider. So that's the party that loaned you your mortgage for your house, okay? Over here, we have the mortgage lenders. Some people call mortgage lenders as mortgage providers or service providers, rather, sorry, service providers or service lender. And then you have the mortgage insurance company. So let me break this down for you because it can be a little bit confusing, but you get to understand where I'm going with this. So for the mortgage providers, think of it like, let's use the analogy of having a car. You have a car, you own your car, correct? So think of the fact you being the car owner as being the mortgage provider. Mortgage lender will be similar, so like a car dealership that services your car, think of that as the same as a mortgage lender or mortgage service provider, okay? So they service everything that the main mortgage provider requires. And last but not least, we'll look at mortgage insurance. So for your car, you have car insurance, right? Which is different, a different party from the other two, right? So in the same token, for your mortgage, you have a mortgage insurance. And one thing that trips people up, even I did not know this, is that the mortgage insurance actually insures the service mortgage lenders, not you yourself, but the mortgage lenders. Keep and make note of that, okay? So in this workplace, let's say we have, and we focus specifically with the mortgage lender and the employee, let's say it's a director called Rosemary. Rosemary has a client called Shelly. Shelly has been having issues. Shelly has been having issues whereby she's behind on her mortgage payments. So her story is this. And the interesting thing is for this information to get to the director's ears, it wasn't the employees that escalated it, but it was Shelly herself who decided to advocate for herself because there was a complex situation. So a little background was this, is this. Shelly had been employed for the longest time, had a very good track record of paying her mortgages on a monthly basis, no issues whatsoever. However, sadly, she lost her job and her income was decreased tremendously. She could not keep up with his mortgage payments. Now, it appeared that Shelly kept having adversity after adversity in terms of jobs, in the sense that, let's say, for example, she had 20 years of experience, no trouble within the first 15 years. But then when it hit the year 16, sadly, certain things that happened in various workplaces that she had to either change jobs or laid off. And that, of course, affected her ability to pay her mortgages. Now, the last scenario was nothing of her fault. They just laid people off. Now, Employees of the mortgage providers, service providers, saw her record, and they didn't really ask her too many questions. They were just going by the policies of who meets criteria, doesn't meet criteria, and what they should be doing in terms of pursuing payments for those who are falling behind. Shelley started to feel like there was a lack of compassion. No one really truly wanted to understand her story. And even when they did understand her or listen to her, they weren't really listening properly. No proper notes were being made. The left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. People would always call her, ask her the same question that was already iterated by her maybe a week before. And the notes were not being read prior to them reaching out to her for payment. Shelley decided to escalate the issue to the director of the service provider, the mortgage provider. Now, this mortgage provider lender, the mortgage lender, the director, let's call this person John. John was very, very compassionate. Actually, that's funny because, yeah, the meaning of John means God is gracious. So that's interesting and compassionate. So this director was very compassionate and gracious and listened to Shelley's story. They ended up having a very long conversation. Now, what was the difference? Going back to what I said at the beginning, negotiators are people. Negotiations deal with people. Granted, John, the director, was not a conflict resolution expert. Well, guess what? He recognized that Shelley is a human being who's going through hard times, who had a good record, is very hardworking, responsible. Unfortunately, things are just not working out the way she anticipated. However, she was always calling them to let them know where she was at. When she could pay, she would pay. So how did they resolve this issue? And the issue was this: she was behind in her payments, about 2 or 3, contacted them to let them know she won't be able to make the upcoming payment. So the director saw her proactiveness, her honesty and transparency, and this was the decision. And I must mention, this was something crucial. She had pre-authorized payments coming out from her bank. And given the fact there were no funds there, her bank was charging her non-sufficient fees. The mortgage lenders were charging her non-sufficient fees. So this is extra money she cannot pay. So John, the director of the mortgage lenders, decided to stop the pre-authorized payments from their ends. Her bank payments should remain the same as in pre-authorized, but from the mortgage perspective, they will stop their payments. And the agreement was this: that Shelley would try her best to let them know what's going on, make payments when she can, but he also had a responsibility to his organization. He told her there were ramifications if it would not happen. But the solution he came up with and the fact that he listened to her made her feel heard, made her feel like a person that's worth listening to, that has worth and dignity. He recognized a few things that is very important that some people forget: that her home is her sanctuary. Her home is her sanctuary. Yes, she could put up her house listed for sale, but then what? What is the guarantee it will sell for her to make up her payments? Because the worst case scenario in such a thing will be foreclosure. But the director decided to work with Shelley so that they wouldn't get to that point, but she will keep them abreast of apprised of what's happening with her. So that is very similar in the negotiation process in any workplace you find yourself. If people do not stop, number one, to look at so when there's a conflict, let me stop here and define what we mean by a conflict. Conflict could be difference in values from an intrapersonal perspective or an interpersonal perspective that causes harm or has potential to cause harm. When I say intra, it could be within myself. I could have conflict within myself, and that could be moral distress, for example. And then it could be inter, so between individuals, right? Different parties coming into play there. So for this context, we use an interpersonal conflict situation. I started by saying A is for analyze, okay? How do you analyze? Analyzing the conflict situation has to do with brainstorming, trying to problem solve a situation. So do you see how John, the director of the mortgage lender, negotiated a mutually beneficial decision regarding Shelley's payments? She heard his position because the conflict was between the two of them, not as individuals, but Shelley and the organization. But the reality is organizations are made of people. So my point is, Shelley had her position. Director John had his position. Each party heard each other out. And the mutually acceptable solution was payments will be stopped. Pre-authorized payments from the mortgage ends will be stopped. And Shelley will call when she can to make those payments within a particular time frame. Okay. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce something to you. It's called the Appraisal Plank. And it's actually a concept or framework I learned from the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation. And basically, how many of you remember being in the playground? And again, I don't want to be presumptions, no matter where in the world you're watching this from, but just transport yourself either to a playground where you rode on a seesaw, or if you never did, recollect movies, or later on Google seesaw. So imagine that seesaw. So basically, think of it as a plank. In the middle, there's like a triangle. Two parties are on either ends. You need each to cooperate for the seesaw to go up and down for it to be fun, right? So the appraisal plank, introduced by the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation, or CIAN, as I'll refer to it going on, talks about 3 elements in a conflict situation. And these need to be addressed and assessed in order for conflict resolution to take place effectively. So we're not going to go into great details about each of these, but I only mentioned them for us to apply to the scenario again. So the 3 elements are power, threat, and uncertainty. So power. So when you think about power, power can take different shapes and forms depending on where you work. You could have expert power. You could have, so for example, you could be an expert in your field. So that gives an extra power over other people who are not knowledgeable in your field. You could have power related to authority that is part of your job description. So you could be a manager. So you have power over your employees. But in that scenario I painted of Shelley and John in the mortgage world, who had the power here? Definitely John. But what did he do? He did not use his power over her. He used his power with her, to work with her, okay? And then we have threats. Threats can take different forms. So again, it's so important to define what you mean by threats. But for the sake of this scenario, let's just define threats as triggers, okay? So the triggering point in this scenario could take different forms. Like for example, for Shelley, the trigger could be, oh my goodness, if I don't pay, if they don't work with me, I could be homeless, for example. And that could make her a little bit more anxious and fearful and defensive. The threat for John is, my goodness, if we don't collect her payments, the head, which would be corporate, and then ultimately the mortgage providers will come after them because he is in a sandwich position, right? So he wants to meet the obligations from above, obligations from above and obligations from below. So that was kind of like a threat. And then last but not least, you have uncertainty. So what's uncertain? The uncertain thing in this picture is, will she be able to pay? And if not, what will happen? So there's fear of loss there. So we usually fear what we lose. That's more important than what we gain, actually, right? So I hope that helps explain the whole notion of negotiation and A for analyze in terms of brainstorming and problem solving. Okay, so we didn't talk about really the communication styles. That'll be another episode. And you have to come back for the 4th A to address that. Okay, so I also wanted to share something with you. I mentioned earlier on that I will tell you a little bit more about myself. So now would be a good time to do that. And part of that, I want to give you a synopsis of what the DHA is and what I shall do for business and how I can serve in the future. So I mentioned that DHA is a Doctor of Health Administration. I personally have a business called Shalom Eagles Wings. And Shalom Eagles Wings is a consultation service. And for my administrative arms service of things, I focus on organizational development. Anything to do with quality improvement, risk management, change management, reviews of policies and governance, I can assist you. And I'm also a conflict resolution coach for the hybrid program with CIAN, so the Canadian International Institute of Applied Negotiation. You can find me at Cheryl at shalomeagleswings.kia. And you can also visit my website at www.shalomeagleswings.care. Guess what? I also have some special discounts for the holidays for you. So the holiday discounts, $10 off most of my organizational services, my consultation services. I highly recommend that you take advantage of it. And these discounts are valid till December 31st, 2021. And last but not least, I have a discount. So a Christmas discount specifically for a book of mine, hot off the press. It is a revision of its original from 10 years ago. It is a book on conflict resolution. As you can tell, I love resolving conflict and I love empowering people to resolve conflicts. So this book is geared towards the operating room, but guess what? The principles apply to all settings you can think of. I love resolving conflict, and I hope you can buy the book or give it as Christmas presents to people who might find it useful. So before we close, and we're almost there to closing, you can always find me same place, same time. And like I said, each episode will talk about conflict resolution in one shape or form. We've been going through the 5 A's of conflict resolution. I'm purposely not letting you know what each of the 5 A's are. They are my original mnemonic. So we've talked about in previous episodes, the first A, which is assess, the second A, which is approach. Today we talked about the third A, which is analyze. So we have 2 more to go, and you have to come back to join us. I like to revisit my vision for this show and for all viewers moving forward. I want us to be the first conflict resolution experts and negotiators who always incorporate a holistic domain while dealing with conflict. In the scenario I painted of John and Shelley, he took a holistic approach. He looked at her from a social perspective, saw her worth as a human being from a spiritual, someone who has value perspective, looked at her through the lens of culture, emotional. He could envision what agony she would be going through in that situation and met her where she was. So on that note, I want you to remember something that is very crucial. You, that's right, you watching me, you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem. You are a precious gem in this world at this time, for such a time as this, to be a solution. Never forget that. Have a splendid day.